I've already handed out to everyone here the format. If you didn't get one, we have them in the back here. A format for the presentation of study papers. I won't go into the paper in detail right now. It is fairly self-explanatory. For those who will be listening to the tape later, you'll probably have gotten it by the time you get this tape as well, because we're going to include it in the next ministerial bulletin, which we also hope to begin publishing on a much more regular basis. And feel free to distribute this paper, reproduce it, or pass it around to any of your erstwhile theologians in your congregation or people who like to submit ideas. You will be eternally grateful if they start submitting them to you, if they come in that format rather than in article form, because in article form you sometimes never know where you are and not quite sure where people are going. With this paper, I think you'll find it very, very easy to sort out exactly what a person is saying and to give them a reply, which people who go to a lot of work and produce some of these things really do deserve. They really deserve to have somebody tell them that they have some good points, or they don't have any good points, or that they are wrong, or dead wrong, or right, or whatever. They do deserve some kind of response. And I think this will make it much easier for you to do. Routinely, these will be submitted to me as the Secretary of the Ministerial Council. If they have merit, I will be forward them on to the Ministerial Council for consideration and the ministry at large for consideration, if necessary to do so. I will make a promise to you that if I think that you are so wrong that you wouldn't want me to send your paper on to the Ministerial Council, I'll reply to you before I do, which I think would be everybody would prefer. That if you're if you happen to really be mistaken about something, don't embarrass me by sending it around to everybody. Send it back and let me work it over again. So they will not automatically go to the Ministerial Council just because you send them to me. I will, try to go over it and give you an answer on at least one or 2 points that you raise, even though I may not do a detailed reply on every aspect of whatever paper it is that you may submit. Now, the subject of this seminar this weekend, was inspired by a book I read not long ago called Well-Intentioned Dragons, Ministering to Problem People in the Church by Marshall Shelley. This book is obtainable from an organization called the Leadership Library, and I'm sorry I did not bring along the information as to the address of this group where this book can be ordered. Alan, see, I've lost track of you. Do you have that? Because I know you went to the trouble to get the book. Is it in the front of the book where it can be obtained? I see 2 or 3 copies of it floating around here. Is it? Good. It is making its way through the bookstores. And the publisher is, it's Leadership Library, but there's another publisher listed there out of Waco, Texas, I believe. Word Books, Waco, Texas. Word Books of Waco, Texas. So I'm sure you can order it through your local bookstore, and probably is your best bet rather than trying to get the Leadership Library. The Leadership Library is kind of a Book of the Month club. And the second book they sent me on prayer, I didn't care much for, so I canceled my membership. But because the book I wanted was the one that you have in your hand there. Paul? Most of the Baptist bookstores have it in stock. Okay. So if you have a Baptist bookstore in your area, you're in luck. But most bookstores should be able to order it. It should be listed in Books in Print, and you can get it in a very few weeks from B. Dalton's or any of the bookstores around the country. Now, the term dragon is Marshall Shelley's term, not mine. And he chose the term, I think, because he calls them well-intentioned dragons, for that matter, because he doesn't want to say that people who are in this category are deliberately trying to cause a lot of trouble. But what he is saying is that there are individuals, well-meaning individuals, who exhibit or engage in behavior patterns which are destructive to the church and to themselves. And one of the most encouraging things to me about this book, and I think Alan mentioned it was to him too, was to come to realize that we are not alone in the kind of problems that we occasionally have in the church. There is nothing that unusual about having difficulties with people in the church. Now, it seems unusual to many of us because many of us who have come out of the Worldwide Church of God were in an organization where dissent was not encouraged. not encouraged, it was not allowed. And in that kind of organization, the kind of problems that you and I have had to face in the Church of God International does not exist. The problem, though, is that the price of that authoritarian structure in the church is much too high. And it is, in fact, in itself destructive in different ways from what, let's say, the behavior of a dragon in a local church is. But it bottles people up in ways so that it prevents growth. Because one of the things I think that is illustrated in this book and underlined in this book is the fact that dealing with difficult people and struggling with the problems that we have with, quote, problem people is one of the ways in which we and they grow. Because in the worldwide Church of God, the same people exist who may be a, quote, dragon, end quote, in the Church of God International. They aren't in the worldwide Church of God, but then you see they never get a chance to express themselves. They never get a chance to find out where their priorities are wrong. They never get a chance to find out or to express where their goals and objectives are in error. They never get a chance to find out their mistakes. So in a free church, any free church, you are going to have problems. And naturally, because the churches are comprised of people, the problems are going to be with people. And how you respond to these problems is critical. What you do is critical. And we have kind of wandered into it and got blindsided by it in the Church of God International because we did not anticipate it. We did not have the background to really know what was coming our way. Whereas I'm sure if we had taken the time to sit down with a minister of an Assembly of God or a ministry of a local Southern Baptist church, they could have probably spoken volumes to us of the kind of problems that we would face as we try to go ahead with a church where all of the individuals in the church are free to serve God according to the leadership of the Holy Spirit in their own lives, without interference, without domination, without somebody telling them what they have to do, when they have to do it, where they have to go, how they have to be there, and all the things that go along with it. I think, as I said, we could have been warned if we had realized that there was anything we needed to listen to. Now, according to Shelley, a dragon is a sincere, well-meaning member of the church, as opposed to a wolf, in sheep's clothing, entering in to spoil the church. He is a sincere, well-meaning member of the church. A dragon is often a talented, strong personality. He is often, or she is often, respected, and deservingly so, in the church. They are usually loyal church members, convinced they are serving God. They do not consider themselves difficult people. Whatever you do, don't ever forget that. Don't ever forget that. They are not naturally rebellious or pathological in their approach to things, but in spite of all the things that we say about them here, they leave ulcers and strained relationships and hard feelings in their wake. They undermine the ministry and the leadership of the church, and they can drive leaders crazy or out of the church completely. And they do all this without ever intending any of it. Now, I think that last phrase is very important to remember. They do not intend to do any of those things. Now, as you go along, you'll find, of course, many different kinds of people that you'll work with. Some dragons, for example, are openly critical. They're the ones that will come along and accuse you of being too authoritarian. Ever happen to anybody? Okay. On the other hand, having been accused of being too authoritarian by one person, you can have somebody else come along and tell you, that is, tell you, the same person, that you're not exerting enough influence or control over the congregation, which can really leave you, with your head spinning at times. When you get one person in the congregation telling you that you are too authoritarian, and another one in the same congregation telling you, the same person, that you're not using enough authority and giving enough guidance and firm direction to the church, and you can begin to wonder, well, now, what in the world should I be doing? There are, of course, people who will come along and tell you that you are not spiritual enough. And then, of course, there might be somebody that tries to tell you that you're too spiritual. There are people who say you're too dominant. Others that will say you're too laid back. There are people who say you're too narrow. Other people will say you're too loose. Some people say you're too structured. Other people will say you're too disorganized. And then, of course, there's always somebody that accuses you of having ulterior motives. Now, I want you to tell me, what is it about all of these things, these type of things, that makes them so frustrating? Because they are, aren't they? Do you know what it is? There is an ingredient in common to all these things that makes them extremely frustrating. Give me a guess. Pride? What else? Possibly. How do you evaluate, how do you answer, let me put it this way, the accusation that you are too authoritarian? How do you answer that? You know? Is there an answer? If somebody comes along and tells you you are not spiritual enough, how do you answer that? You see, when you look at these things, these are really unanswerable. They have to do with one person's opinion, the way he feels down inside of himself, and there is no answer to some of these things. Now, you need to understand this, that dragons, as they put it, are quite common. They exist anywhere and everywhere. They can give you gray hairs. One pastor made the statement that anyone who has been in the ministry longer than an hour and a half knows the wrath of a dragon, which possibly is an overstatement. Another minister said, where there's light, there's bugs. Obviously a Southern minister. Now I want you to keep in mind something. Every single illustration, all this stuff that we're talking about here, is in other churches. You know, none of these illustrations, and none of the illustrations in this book come out of the Church of God International. But you will feel that Marshall Shelley has been reading our mail. You really will. And it is encouraging. It is profoundly encouraging to realize that you are running smack dab into a problem that is common among churches that allow their membership liberty in Christ. They do not attempt to control the membership of the church, but allow them a freedom of expression, a freedom of participation. And you and I have got to answer the question of whether we would rather work with that and endure maybe the struggle or run in another direction entirely. Now, I'd like to keep this seminar today and tomorrow, or not today and tomorrow, today, very informal. And I'd like to have your participation. In fact, we must have your participation. I could have just recommended the book to all of you. I could have sent off to the place and ordered several boxes of them and sent them to you. And I feel it would have been of enormous value. I really do, because of just if for nothing else, reading through it and coming to the realization that you are not alone. That because you have what Marshall Shelley calls a dragon in your church, does not necessarily mean that you have failed. It does not mean that your church is spiritually diseased, because that's one of the things you feel. There must be something wrong with us, or this wouldn't be going on. Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. It's one of those things that happens when people interact together and are free, as I said before, to express themselves. So I want you to feel free today to express yourself. I want you to feel free to say what's on your mind with a full realization, of course, that we're taping what everyone is saying here today, including what you're saying, for the sake of sharing our experiences. The reason I felt we should have a workshop on it is because the Church of God International, even though these problems are common to Baptists and Assembly of God and Presbyterian and whatever church you might want to talk about, that our problems are our problems, and that we do have some unique problems, and there is a need for the sharing of experiences as to how we are going to solve our problems and how we are going to work with our own difficult people as opposed to dealing necessarily with someone else. So as we go along, I'm going to be asking a number of questions, and I'm going to want an answer. I want you to participate. And at any point in time, if you have a question or an observation, please let us know. And we got a microphone, in fact, kind of pass around to take some of the things that you might have to say. Shelley, one of his first illustrations in the book, he talks of a pastor of a rural church who had taken a job moonlighting as a school bus driver. You know, it's not that unusual because, you know, rural church is small, probably doesn't pay very well. And they gave him the freedom to take that job to augment his income. There was in this church an older deacon who actually, as it happened, what turned out to be the pastor's very closest friend probably in the congregation. They got along very well. They enjoyed one another's company. He thought he really had his support. The man oftentimes gave the minister gifts of produce, and he had as a farmer, he had a big old gas tank out there for his tractors, and he commonly filled the preacher's car up with gas free of charge out of his gas tank back there. So he was a very helpful man. He donated more than 30% of the local church budget. Now, right there gives you a clue as to what might later be coming. Now, the pastor one day driving home on the school bus had to discipline an unruly student. He went by the book, though. He did it exactly like the book said. He told the student, when he dropped him off at home, that he would not be picking him up the next day. The penalty, being rowdy on the school bus is you don't get to ride a school bus. So he told him he would not be picking him up the next day. He went back and informed the school supervisor about the matter, just went exactly by the rules laid down for bus drivers. The next day, the deacon, who happened to be a friend of the boy's father, he was not the deacon's boy, mind you, he was just the son of a friend. He went to the pastor and told him that he had overstepped his authority, that he had mishandled the situation, and said, quote, "I think it's time you looked for another church. Your ministry here is over." End quote. Now, you can sit there and imagine how that pastor must have felt. He thought the man was his friend. He knew he was a generous, good-hearted fellow. They had gotten along beautifully up until this point. He does exactly what he is supposed to do, and he's going, in one area of his life, in the school system, and he's going to lose his job as a pastor of a church because of it. Now, this is what Marshall Shelley calls a dragon. And yet the deacon obviously was a good man and a generous man. How do things like this happen? And even though the school board backed the minister, within 6 months he was forced to resign from that congregation. Now you tell me, what went wrong here? Where were the problems here? Where are the clues that one would look for? Don't be bashful. I know you all aren't. Tom?
Well, instead of the entire congregation taking the responsibility of the financial affairs of the church and being distributed equally, they were allowing one person to step forward and take control unknowingly, possibly. If the minister felt, as you say in this book, that this man was doing all of this, he should have seen trouble coming later on at some time.
Okay, he should have seen trouble coming somewhere down the line. Who else? Charles?
First of all, I think the pastor driving the school bus and dropping the kid off forgot to go talk to those folks' parents. If he had talked to those folks' parents, he might have avoided a problem with the parents, not even with the deacon. He would have avoided a problem with the parents, who then would have realized here was a human being that was trying to do his job. And what I think he did, he didn't follow through completely with the discipline. He didn't go to the people that were involved.
Chris?
Well, I think you get a basic problem here, and that he's forced to drive a school bus in order to support himself. And this puts him into an area of potential conflict with other members of the congregation in a materialistic or a secular world, as opposed to his duties as a pastor in the spiritual realm. And consequently, where he may be perfectly acceptable in the spiritual area, people will counter him there and seek to overthrow him there because of a struggle in a secular area which goes on in our society every day.
But on the other hand, that was not something really he could do much about when you get right down to it. He had a salary, then he had a wife and kids. And he says, this won't reach, and so I either cannot take the church or, I have to augment my income. And so they agreed upon it. But I see virtually everybody here isn't just partially employed by the church. They're not employed by the church at all. So, how does that relate? Henry?
I feel like the individual, since his primary job was a pastor of the church, but prior taking to the secondary job, should have met with the church, with the deacons, with the congregation, and should have went over this with them, explaining the duties he would have had as a school bus driver. And had the church been aware of his duties and his secondary job, then I don't think he would have had the problem.
Okay. Chris?
The point I was making was that in his choice of a secondary job, it brought him into a potential arena of conflict with the people he was also serving as a pastor.
He chose a job which probably, might get him into a problem.
Right.
Although he would arguably have said, how could I foresee that? It would have been obvious. Yeah. Yes.
I think that the pastor who was telling this, he didn't give enough details about what happened on that school bus, because I don't think that father would have been that irate about it. Apparently he abused the child verbally or something, and he didn't tell this in his story because it would have put him in a bad light. My father was always tickled pink when I was punished at school because it was something he didn't have to do. At any rate, this deacon and this father were apparently very shallow, and the deacon apparently thought he owned the church, which he did, in fact, do. And there wasn't really much that the pastor could do about it, but I still think he left out a lot of details.
I have little doubt that he did, but on the other hand, I think you could argue that the details are not terribly relevant for what do you expect the boy to say when he gets in the house. Just what do you expect him to say? He's supposed to go in and tell his father he can't get on the school bus tomorrow, and it doesn't make any difference what you did. It's going to sound awful when it gets in the house. And of course, if you've got parents involved who are not capable, like your father was, of appreciating discipline in the school system and admiring it, you could also argue there are hundreds of details you could argue as to this might have been true and that might have been true, but to me, probably the dominant factor in this, and it's not necessarily one that was even preventable from anybody's perspective, because it's one of those things that all of a sudden you're there and you don't even know how you got there, which is the case with most conflicts you have in a church. You are there, it is suddenly full-blown, and your head is swimming, and you're still trying to figure out how it happened. But the big problem, the fundamental problem in this area was that this deacon had a proprietary interest in the church. He considered it was his church. And the pastor was in trouble from day one when he walked into the place. The deacon was going to run the show. Now, he also doubtless if he was able to contribute up to 30% of that church's total annual budget, he was a bull of the woods in his community as well. And so consequently, when a man in the community comes to him and says, "You're a preacher," in which he doesn't say the boy's father was even in the congregation, and says, "You're a preacher," is doing this, that, and the other thing, and embarrasses the deacon, well then, obviously, trouble is on the way. But you see, when you look at this, you have to understand the deacon felt that he was absolutely right. He felt that this young upstart preacher had gotten way out of line in this situation. And he confronted him on it and told him basically his ministry was over in that church. He basically all but fired him at that point in time. I gather they must have made some trouble for him with the school board, because it says ultimately the school board completely upheld him in what he had done. So there probably were hearings and everything else about what he had done. The preacher felt totally justified because he had gone absolutely by the book. And so you have, though, ultimately a situation that arises which absolutely destroyed his ministry in that area. And everybody involved in it felt that they had done the right thing. Now, as I said, one of the things that can create this kind of situation, you get into these problems, and one of the things you have to remember is that people inevitably in these situations all believe that they are right. The proprietary interest in a church can take, though, a lot of different forms. Tell me, what kind of form can it take, the proprietary interest in a church? This problem of dealing with a church where, as its pastor, you have come in and are trying to serve the church, and there is somebody or someone who considers it their church. How many forms can that take?
Many members of the house.
Whatever. Did you know? Who else? Okay, let me put it to you this way. If you go and get involved in a church that is already established, you are the new kid on the block. So regardless of what form it may take, you will be considered an outsider, and it will not be, whosever church it is not your church. You will not have a proprietary interest in the church. You will not be considered initially as really having any part in the church, if that's too strong a term. Now, this is a tricky area, and one of the most consistent problems, and we had it in the Worldwide Church of God, but we handled it really in a kind of a different way in the Worldwide Church of God. People had to endure it. But the problem existed there, and it existed very frequently, more than a lot of other places, because of our frequent transfers of ministers. Okay, here's a minister that's been in the church for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And the people like him, and he's been a good minister. He's worked hard for them, and he has basically kept the church on a lot of activities and programs and so forth, and has had a style. Because every individual, every minister has his own style. Okay, he gets transferred out, and the people give him a party, and there are a lot of tears and hugs and going away presents and all this sort of thing. And the new fellow comes in the next week or so. He is almost foreordained to be a loser. Almost foreordained to be a loser. What do you do? Tell me what you do. What would you do, Paul?
I would start out by trying to explain to them that I wasn't the previous minister. My personality was different. I would deal with things differently, and they would have to learn me, I would have to learn them, and we just have to give it time.
You just address it right off the bat and give it time. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Basically, you've got to get the confidence of the people.
You've got to get the confidence of people. How would you go about doing that?
Well, like Paul said, go to them, talk to them, and have meetings and lay out your plan, what you intend to do, and what you expect of them, and what they should expect of you.
Okay.
I'd tell them I wasn't trying to take that man's place in their heart, but to fill the position that he held, and that I would like to be their friend in my own way, and not try to replace him.
I think that's a very important consideration. I'm not trying to replace your former pastor. His contribution, his place in this church is secure and permanent. Acknowledging the contribution of those who have gone before is very important. Be sure and note that. Charles.
Number one, you got to sell them on the fact that you're not competing with the man that just left. Right. You're your own personality, and you have to get acquainted. You have to spend some time in homes and getting acquainted people so that they know that you're a person too. And it's just like it's a selling job, whether you're selling apples or oranges or what have you. Right. You have to sell yourself.
You've got to go and sell yourself. Right. I think that's another important consideration. In other words, in this organization, there isn't anyone to come in there and sell you. There's no one that can come down and say, you people have got to take this man as your minister. He's yours for better or worse, and you're going to like it or lump it. Nobody can do that in the Church of God International. We could try it, but it wouldn't work. And in fact, it doesn't really work in the Worldwide Church of God, even though oftentimes it seems to work. A lot of that might be defining what do you mean work. But can you think of some practical thing? Now, he said visit. First of all, we acknowledge the contribution of the former man, and we get out and we visit these people. We talk to them. We spend time with them.
I'd ask for their advice, find out what had been done, what was successful, and ask for their help.
Ask for their help and their advice. I think that is very sound. Henry?
I think one of the most important things to do in a situation like that is have a good conference and a good talk and a good meeting with the previous minister.
Yes.
Spend some time with him.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Good talk with the previous minister.
First thing I would try to do would be one of the first things would be to identify the respected leaders within the congregation. Identify those people and get to know them and get them on my side.
Okay, you want to win the trust of the people who are acknowledged as leaders and respected people, and I think that is critical. Because without their help, you can't make it. That's one thing you've got to realize, that without help, you can't make it. It's too easy to go charging off and try to go it alone. But the fact of the matter is, it's true even when you were a part of the original group and formed the charter like Henry was down in his area. He was right there right from the day one of that group, and he's grown up with them. But even there, he can't function without the support of key people and leaders in the congregation who should eventually, hopefully, be your council. You know, if the church is, elects the right people to be the council. And sometimes they don't. And you're going, that's one of the reasons I have in the guidelines that the minister is to supervise the election and to explain the qualifications of council members before the election, to be sure that's right up in the front of everybody's mind. What else is there in terms of practical suggestions that we might have if we're moving into an established situation, and even though they're asking us to come in and help them about what we might do? Tom?
Well, we had a good session in Knoxville yesterday afternoon, and many of the ideas were brought out along this line, and it really takes time. And, the subject basically was deep abiding love, and it takes deeds. The things must happen, and you must learn to know each other before you can love anyone. And so that if you go into an area, it's going to just take a great amount of time.
I think that one thing that has not been mentioned here, but has been kind of beat around, hit around the edges of, that I think you also need to think about, is don't get in too big a hurry to implement your own program. Don't change anything right away. Somebody said, find out how things have been done, okay? Do a good job and a thorough job of finding out, one, how things have been done, and two, why they have been done that way. Because until you understand how and why about how things have been done, you're not in a position to institute meaningful change in a congregation even when it is needed. So give attention to the past and don't be in a hurry to implement new programs, because if you are, you're very likely to step on hidden feelings. You're very likely to hurt people when you don't even know you are hurting them. And you could even make enemies of people that are never going to be your friends again. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. And I'll tell you, it's far better not to offend him in the first place. So don't feel that you have to come charging in and make all kinds of modifications, alterations. We're going to shape this group up right off the bat, or you will walk straight into a den of dragons. I can promise you that. Any other comments now on this particular illustration and problem? Yes?
I think also if the previous minister would introduce the new minister to the congregation, stand behind him 100%, that would sort of take away some of the fears and get the people to have a little bit more confidence in the new person taking the old one's position. Because the previous minister, he started out new at one time. They didn't know him. And like we've said before, it takes time to build that love. But they can start off on a better standing with the new minister if the old minister would introduce the new minister and stand behind him and tell about his qualifications and his good points.
Let's imagine for a moment, get right back to you, Paul. Let's imagine for a moment that Charles here, who has been working in Atlanta for some period of time, got transferred out and was working someplace else. We're not very far from the truth, actually, of what has happened even where Charles is concerned. But let's suppose, in addition to that, that another minister, by some fortuitous chance or circumstance, got transferred to Atlanta. And he begins to work in the Atlanta church. Do you suppose it's possible that Charles might get some phone calls late at night from people in Atlanta who weren't just entirely happy with something that the new minister was doing? Is that a chance? Anybody think that might be a possibility? All right, now, I want you to tell me, what should Charlie do when he gets those phone calls? Blank stares. Bob?
I think first off that he should talk with the other minister that come into the area and explain the situation to him first and foremost, and then together work out a plan to talk to the people and see what the problem is.
Okay. I feel there are things that are... Yes, we've got to first assume that the incoming minister is competent and qualified.
I'm assuming that he is.
If we can make that assumption, then at some point in time, Charlie's got to cut the cord.
But how does he go about doing that? How do we actually do it? Tell them your story.
What I told him, he should have left the 3 envelopes. It seemed like there was a city manager that was leaving his job, and the new city manager took over. So the new one asked the old one, says, what do I really need to know to handle this job? You got any instructions? The guy said, well, yes, I have. So I left you 3 envelopes on your desk. Said, when you get in trouble, just turn to those envelopes. So after 6 months, the guy got a little problem with the press and the newspapers. So he opened envelope number 1. Envelope number 1 says, blame everything on the previous administration. So he did that for 6 months, got away with it. Then he can no longer use that excuse, and he turned to envelope number 2. That says, tell everyone you have a plan. So he would tell everybody, I have a plan for that. Every time I have a problem, I have a plan for that. And this worked for about a year. And finally, he could not come up with any plans. He got desperate. He went and got envelope number 3. Instruction inside it says, make 3 envelopes.
Charlie, apart from the 3 envelopes, when he's getting these calls late at night from somebody, they're calling after 11 o'clock because that's when the phone rates change. And here's Charlie trying to get his job done down there. And here are people calling from his area complaining about what this new minister has done, much of which what he's doing is right, and maybe a few things really aren't all that right, but nevertheless they're not contrary to the Bible. Most things aren't really quite perfect, so we have to assume that's the truth. How does he handle it? I want more advice. Charlie's going to give himself some advice.
First of all, I'd try to reassure the people for whatever their calls, and believe me, I've had those calls, so I know what they are. But I would try to reassure those people that the gentleman is there, that I know him personally. I've known him for a long time. I know that he's a different personality, and try to assure that person that, and to find out if they're not looking at personalities. And if they're looking at personalities, then we need to get away from that. But if there's something biblical or somewhere in some area that they're mistreating people, then that's something that I would probably get on the phone and call back the minister that's involved. But I certainly would try to assure that person that that minister that's taking over is qualified, has his own way of doing things. They're a little different than mine, and I assure you that they're different. But then he will get the job done just like he would if I was there. And you can trust the man, because I've been able to trust him, and it would depend a lot on what they said and what the complaint was. But in most instances, it's something minor that really doesn't cut it anyway. It's just something that really don't need to be concerned about. It's personalities, most generally.
One thing that you have to keep in mind is you do have to evaluate just how important is this complaint. Is it really critical, or is a person just sounding off, or they just want an excuse to call you, and chat with you for a while. So you have to think. Let me phrase this question another way. Let's suppose you wanted to make this new guy's job really tough. What would you say? What would you say? What would be the first thing you would say if you wanted to really make life tough on this new guy in town? First words out of your mouth, Tom.
To the caller?
Yeah.
I'd ask him to go to them personally. To the minister.
You do that if you want to make the minister's job hard?
Well, it's going to make it hard. That's right. I'd rather for it to be hard for him because he's there than the caller to call me.
That really is one of the better things you could tell him, though. Because to tell him that, they go to him, and he has the chance now to straighten it out. And that's not going to make his job hard. If I wanted to make his job hard, and somebody came in and said, did you know that Mr. So-and-so has done this, that, and the other thing? I would say, what? What? You're kidding. That's what I would do. I would say, I don't know. Well, I shouldn't say anything. I really, we've got to be Christian about this. After your initial explosion, boy, I really don't know. But I guess I shouldn't say anything. I really don't understand why he's doing that. In other words, you can commiserate, and the person will feel reinforced that he is right about this new minister. And the initial steps are taken, which will eventually, they'll call you again. And then they'll call you again. And they'll call you again. You're ensured that you will be called many, many times. And over a period of time, you all can commiserate together. And sooner or later, that person will experience a complete rupture with the new minister because you have commiserated with him. So it is really easy. But, fellas, really, if you're looking for sport, that's not the way to do it. That's like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, you're the kind of guy to go out and dynamite fish if you do that. That's no way to go about conducting your affairs. Nobody really would want to do that. But you know what? You will almost do it before you've had a chance to think. And it'll happen because people will set you up. They will call you up, see, and they will phrase all of their initial remarks, all of their lead-ins, and then their final punchline will be designed to elicit the what? And it takes an awfully strong man not to say it. It really does. I've experienced this in 2 church organizations now as to how it works. We used to play a game in the Worldwide Church of God to see how high you can make Ted jump. You go into the office and say, did you know that I jump? You set him up. You give him this little set of lines, about this, that, or the other thing, kind of knowing looks, and then you hit him with a punchline to see how far you can lift him out of his chair. People did that with Herbert Armstrong. And then one day, having played the game for a while and enjoyed it immensely, I caught people doing it to me. It's great sport in any organization, and it is also great sport in churches, is to see how high you can make whoever it is jump. And so be very, very careful and watch for that, because people will be, and it's a game. It's not real communication. It is a game. Responsible, professional people, a man who is dedicated to becoming a professional minister and not just an amateur, has got to learn a certain degree of discipline when talking to people over the phone or in person. And for some reason, these things almost always happen over the phone. Almost always over the phone. So always look out for those phone calls. And make up your mind if somebody's calling you in the evenings when you're tired, and you've done your day's work, and you're sitting there trying to unwind, and maybe you've got a beer in your hand, maybe it's the second one of the evening. You might as well make up your mind when you talk to them to say absolutely nothing committal. Make yourself a list of non-committal phrases and keep it by the phone if you have to. I got me a little file on non-committal letters. If I have to have them, I can. Only got one in it. But if I have to dodge a question, but I have to reply, I've got a way of doing it. I can write back to the person, and I can answer their letter, and I can be very kind, and I can avoid commenting. And there are times when you've got it to do. There are times when you can't even do it politely. There are times when there isn't any way to get around it but saying, John, you called me at a real bad time. And I just don't think I ought to really say anything about that tonight. You let me think about it. And, let him go ahead and sound off. There's no reason not to let the guy sound off. But at the same time, there's every reason in the world to be really sure that you don't sound off, no matter what. That is, if you're going to be a part of a ministerial brotherhood, and if we're going to respect one another and support one another and work with one another, and it's the only way we're going to succeed, then we're going to have to start acting responsibly toward one another. I say start. I think for the most part we are doing it, but we're going to have to, what we have to watch out for is the traps, the landmines, the things that you don't know are there. See, because what I'm dealing with is I'm not trying to convince you of something you don't believe. In any of the things that I'm saying today, am I? Really? You believe, you agree with me. I can see heads nodding all over. You know that. The problem is not what you know. The problem is your level of awareness of what's going on. And it can sneak up on you before you ever have any idea what has taken place or where the thing is going to lead. So, critical areas for you to give some thought to. And to me, one of the great ones is this question of the proprietary interest in the church. And you have to realize or have to suspect that anybody and everybody that you're running into contact with in the church has got it. He feels like it's his church in some degree. And if you are not an insider from the very word go, you are the new kid on the block, well, then you have got, really, it's not that difficult a task. It's not that difficult a task. It only becomes difficult if you try to do too much too soon. Instead of settling in with the people, finding out what they want to do, go along with them in what they want to do as long as it's, within reason. Because there isn't any reason oftentimes to struggle with people over goals and vision, and there's every reason not to do so when you're the new kid on the block, when it's not, quote, your church, end quote. And of course we all know whose church it is, but that isn't, that nevertheless doesn't keep us from feeling that it is our church, because what we are dealing with most of the time in these areas is feelings, emotions, not rationalizations. Because if we were being rational, we would not be having these difficulties. And if we would just sit down and say, well, now here's the way I look at it. Oh, I see. And you could just reason your way through to a logical conclusion, no problem. Now then, as I said, one of the things that we're trying to do in this seminar is to raise your level of awareness. And Shelley, in the process of raising your level of awareness, lists several types of dragons, which I thought was rather fascinating, and I think you'll kind of enjoy them too. We got about 5 minutes to 1 hour? Okay. I think rather than go straight into this list, I'd like to go through his list of dragons with you, and after we've taken a break and got a full hour to go on the tape. So let's just stretch our legs for a moment and be back in 5 minutes sharp.